Don't forget, you can pick up the new Series 3 tokens featuring vampires, elementals, treasures, and elves over at mtggoldfishmerch.com. Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive. And as you know, this week we are talking about Magic's newest and one of its most exciting sets. That is Dominaria and its impact on constructed formats. So we've talked Commander, we've talked Modern, which means today is Standard time. And I'm super excited to be joined by a very special guest in Zac Elsik, brewer, Magic player, judge extraordinaire. What's going on, Zac?
Hey, I'm really glad to be here with you and get to talk about some of these sweet Dominaria cards.
I'm really excited for this set. So before we talk about the cards in specific, what are your thoughts on Dominaria in general, Zac? Like, how good is this set? How much will it impact Standard? Just kind of your overall feelings about Dominaria.
I would say that I really enjoy it personally. Just looking through, I like the nostalgia element, even though I did not play that much from the older era of Magic. The cards are quite sweet. They give off this feel of being very powerful or very unique. There are quite a few legendary cards. I think the set is very well designed, and I'm looking forward to playing with it.
Yeah, I am super hyped for this set too. I'm very excited. It's been a while since I've been this excited, and so today we have 10 cards to talk about, along with a couple of honorable mentions. And we don't really have a specific countdown order for this one, so don't take it as the last card we talk about is number one or anything. This is just kind of 10 cards that seem super sweet for Standard. So we're going to jump into it with our two honorable mentions, and they are Oath of Teferi and also Vicious Offering. So, Zac, what do you think of Oath of Teferi?
This is one of those where I could see it has potential for something, especially in a format like Standard. It's a little bit unknown what can happen with this type of card because the effect is quite unique. I know in the past we had similar effects like the Chain Veil, but this is just a static sit here. All of your planeswalkers from the future are going to be better. Not to mention it comes with this random upside of flickering something, which if we've learned anything with Fellow Guitar Guardian, that means it's good, right?
Yeah, it reminds me, Chain Veil, it's definitely better than that. Chain Veil is, I've played some Chain Veil decks, and it is a very expensive card. It's 4 mana and 4 to activate, I think. It kind of reminds me a little bit, too, of like a fixed doubling season as far as the interaction with planeswalkers. You don't get the double loyalty when they enter the battlefield, but being able to plus twice in a turn does get you to ultimate pretty quickly. So are there any specific planeswalkers in Standard that you're excited for with this, or is it just kind of like, throw it in your Super Friends deck and it's going to be good?
I suppose the ones where, like you said, how you can reach an ultimate a lot quicker, Tezzeret the Schemer comes to mind because he starts at 5. So that means if you play him after the fact, you can tick him up and then tick him up, and he's already at 7, which is his ultimate range. Or even doing something simple like Chandra Torture Defiance. You can tick up for 2 red and tick up for 2 red again. There's the potential it's really cool.
That's a good point with Chandra, because you're kind of casting Oath of Teferi for 5 mana, and then you're netting 4 mana from the Chandra. So it kind of makes Chandra free, I guess, essentially, if you just plus plus. So that's kind of a neat interaction. I think another interesting one that I saw is the X mana Nissa. Like, if you can cast X mana Nissa with, I think it's 6 mana, and then you can plus 2 to scry and then immediately ultimate to hit for 10. So 6 mana, like 10 damage in the air seems like semi-reasonable.
That is right on curve. That's a good point, from 5 to 6. And I guess the other 3 mana walker, if you can call it that, Jace Cunning Castaway. It starts at 3 loyalty and it ults at 5, so that gets to ultimate range almost immediately.
You can make so many Jaces. And how about our other honorable mention? This one's kind of on the other end of the scale. An efficient removal spell, Vicious Offering. So how good is this as far as Standard removal is concerned, Zac?
I think this one is just fine. We've seen, what was it, Moment of Craving in the Ixalan block, and that one was fairly sweet because it, instead of it costing black like some of the previous instant speed removal spells where it's just black and generic mana, so it's very easy to splash, and it cleans up any of the early aggression type creatures. But the option to go up to a -5, -5 for clearing away, whether that's Hazoret or Glorybringer or Scarab God, I think that plays a big deal, especially since the Hidden Stockpile Tokens deck, they already play black, and so they can just easily slot this card in.
Yeah, and you're triggering Revolt on your hidden stockpiles and stuff, so it's not much of a downside. I was going to ask you about that, the kicker part of it. Is that something you got to build around, or is this just you can play it in whatever deck as an early game removal spell, and then know that it might not be great if you're sacking a Ravenous Chupacabra or Gonti or something, but if you really got to kill a Hazoret, it's still going to be fine? Or do you have to try to kind of play Scrap Heap Scroungers, play the token deck to really harness the power of the -5/-5 kicker?
I don't think it requires much of a build around. I think it just kind of shows off how impressive Kicker is as an ability, simply because it gives you another option. So the fact that you're just using this as a simple removal spell works most of the time. But when you really need it as a better removal spell, it's there and available, and you can make that decision as necessary to say, okay, I really do have to augment this so that I can get the Hazoret off the table.
All right, so let's move on from our world of honorable mentions into our top 10 list, and we're starting off with not just one card, but an entire cycle of cards, the return of the enemy check lands, completing the cycle from Ixalan, originally from Innistrad. So how big of a deal is it that these lands are in Standard, and that we have another cycle of enemy duels? Because enemy mana was pretty rough for a while, so how big of a deal is this cycle for Standard, Zach?
I think it might not be that impactful, but the fact that these are cards that are going to help fix the mana base of some deck, maybe even control decks, just having access to different blue-red is a big one. Blue for your counter magic and red for your removal. Just being able to build a better mana base, I think, is where these are going to play a big role.
Yeah, I think one thing I really like about the cycle is a lot of the Ixalan tribes, which they haven't caught on a whole lot, but vampires and merfolks, which might have more potential after rotation this fall, but their mana was kind of rough. It was really hard to have a couple of good duels for allied color decks, but then if you want to play like blue-green merfolk, you're playing like the uncommon or common enter the battlefield tap duel because you just really need another dual land. So these are a big upgrade over what we had before. So I think it's a pretty reasonable cycle. For me, these feel like kind of the baseland Standard cycle. You can never really complain about them. They're not insane, like when we get some better cycles of lands, like I guess arguably fast lands or shock lands or fetch lands when they randomly come into Standard. But it's a very solid cycle, and I'm never unhappy to have them in the Standard format. Let's move on to the next card on our list, and we're getting down to the lower rarities, starting with Adventurous Impulse, which is kind of the green ponder, Zach? Is that what we're looking at with this one?
It's similar to Oath of Nissa, and we saw Oath of Nissa saw quite a deal of play in Standard. Obviously, you can't get Planeswalkers with it, but that's more or less fine because the card still operates in the sense that you're going to be able to get the land to fix your early weird hands that aren't exactly perfect, and it will always become a very solid threat later in the game.
Yeah, it feels like it just adds a lot of consistency to decks. Do you think this is something that if you're playing basically any green deck with a reasonable amount of creatures, is this just in the conversation now? Is it that level of good? Or does it require a more specific purpose?
I think it's going to be one of those cards that kind of holds a few decks together. So what we'll see moving into the new Dominaria Standard is you're going to have a lot of these, whether it's tribal decks or ramp decks or something with a lot of creatures, and they're going to play a lot of the creature threats and a lot of the big bombs. And then over time, maybe a month or two, they'll start figuring out, okay, these cards weren't as good as others, and I'd rather just have a play set of Adventurous Impulse so I can get access to my more powerful cards more quickly, such as Carnage Tyrant or Rekindling Phoenix.
That is a really good point about how that'll probably work. I do really like as well that it does hit land. So in the early game, it does help you make sure you're hitting your land drops, and then in the late game, it's still just as great because digging 3 deep to find, like you said, Carnage, Tyrant, Rekindling Phoenix, whatever your best creature is, for just a single mana, you probably have enough mana to hopefully just immediately deploy the threat that you're digging for, which makes it very powerful, especially for a green deck, which traditionally didn't get great cantrips like this, but now it probably has the best cantrip in Modern, in Ancient Stirrings, Adventurous Impulse, and Standard, so it seems to be Green's thing these days. Let's move on to the next card on our list, and this is another one that's kind of 2 cards. So the actual card is Llanowar Elves, but it comes along with a friend in Steel Leaf Champion because they kind of work pretty well together, Zach. So what do you think of these ones?
So just to start with Steel Leaf Champion, this is a card that I think we'll see play at some point just because it's so big for such little mana investment. Sure, the restrictions on casting it are a little bit difficult, but I think that's enough to make a mono green stompy sort of deck work out, where you can just play heavy hitters, including cards like the green dinosaurs. And the best card to pair with Steel Leaf Champion is definitely Llanowar Elves, because it curves from turn 1 green, to turn 2 3 green. And I can see that being a deck type in Standard. However, with that said, I still think that Llanowar Elves is going to make a big impact in Standard simply by pairing with any other color. The ability to ramp up and cast your powerful threat a whole turn sooner is something that shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, this is a card that Wizards hasn't let in Standard for a while now because they thought it was too good, but they made an exception for Dominaria. Playing your 3-drop on turn 2, it is an inherently powerful thing to do. So I think you're very right. Like, together these cards could make a sweet mono green or almost mono green. Maybe you splash for some better removal or something, but close to mono green stompy deck. And then Llanowar Elves has potential in all kinds of archetypes because it's just so powerful. So looking at this from the other side, Zach, assuming that Llanowar Elves is going to be really heavily played, does this impact the deck building of your control decks or your mid-range decks? Is this going to change the removal that you're playing because you have to bolt the bird on turn 1 or you're going to fall too far behind?
It's definitely a curious condition that these control decks are going to have to respect a 1-mana elf, especially knowing that 50% of the time or more they're going to be on the draw, where the opponent on the play will play Forest Llanowar Elf, and then you have nothing in play, so you either deal with the elf or a potential 5/4 or something more threatening. So cards like Vicious Offering or Moment of Craving may be too slow. Lightning Strike, too slow. We have Fatal Push, so that's in black. I know red has Magma Spray is a good option at the moment, or Shock. It's a bit odd that we have Wizards Lightning, the discounted Lightning Bolt, but it can't be used to stop Llanowar Elves' acceleration.
Yeah, it's good in the late game, probably, if you're a wizard deck, but not very good at killing the Llanowar Elves on turn 1. Well, let's move on our list to another removal spell, an uncommon removal spell. This one doesn't deal with the Llanowar Elves on turn 1, but it still feels pretty powerful, and that is Seal Away. So how good is this card for Standard?
I really like this card, mostly because I enjoy a lot of control decks, and having a removal spell that is 2 mana is excellent. Especially when a couple years back we had Stasis Snare, which costs 3, and that just exiled a creature. Seal Away is very similar, and the condition that you can't get untapped creatures, generally that's probably fine, because if anything, this lets you take care of Rekindling Phoenix, because that card essentially has to attack to do anything that's relevant, or it can take care of Steel Leaf Champion, or even Glorybringer, even after the turn that it exerts. The fact that it exile is extra important, especially if, say, Godfarer decks are continuing to be popular, where you don't want the card to exist in the graveyard. Or something like Scarab God. Sure, they don't have to attack with the Scarab God, but at least it kind of offers this, I have this card and I have this answer in case you start attacking.
Yeah, it feels like in Standard, Scarab God might be an exception, but there's not too many creatures that are powerful without attacking. It's not like in Modern, Eidolon of the Great Revel or Dark Confidant are cards that can really punish you for removal like this. But in Standard, there's not really too much on that level that's just going to sit there and win the game without attacking, which in some ways might make Seal Away even better than Journey to Nowhere because of the flash aspect. Allows you to get Rekindling Phoenixes and Glory Bringers and Hazarets without taking that first hit of damage. So I too think this card is going to be very, very strong. Is this just the premier white removal spell moving forward for Dominaria Standard?
It very well might be. It might also cause a shift in the meta a little bit. Heart of Kirin fell out of favor a bit. However, because that card has Vigilance, that might be one of the cards that comes back because it's a threat that's a little bit harder to deal with. I could also see a control type deck pop up that takes advantage of Ice and Manipulator, because then you can tap down any creature and exile it with Seal Away.
Ooh, that's a combo. Let's move on our list, away from the world of removal spells and into the world of massive zombie knight legends. Josu, vess, Lich Knight. So Zach, what are you doing with this one?
This one on the surface, it feels like it should be incredibly good, or it might just be subpar because a 4-mana 4/5 may or may not be good enough, as we saw with Ripjar Raptor. I think what makes this card good is the fact that it just has Menace, which means even if you play it on curve, say turn 4, it's still completely reasonable because it's one of those threats that it's difficult to deal with. You can't simply chump block, or you can't make a profitable trade. You have to block with 2 creatures. But this will probably slot into a deck similar to the green-black ramp deck that we've been seeing a little bit, where it acts as a great finisher because the card itself can put 20 power worth of menacing creatures into play at once, and that's impressive.
Yeah, that is a lot of power. It's almost like an Army of the Damned or something if you can kick it. For 10 mana, 20 power across that many bodies is a pretty good deal, and I really like the flexibility of it. A 4/5, like you said, it's not always the best, but Menace does make it relevant in more situations, and it's a reasonable blocker if you're playing a ramp deck and you just need to get something down to kind of slow down your opponent's attacks a little bit while you're waiting to play your Hour of Promises and whatnot. Then Josu Vess is a pretty reasonable blocker against most decks, so I think this card is pretty sweet. Do you think the tribal synergy is relevant at all? Does the fact that it's a knight, is that relevant? I know zombies kind of aren't a thing anymore, or is this just purely a value card for ramp decks?
It's possible being a knight is relevant. I know that there are at least 1-2 other cards in the set, maybe more, that care specifically about knights. One of them's in the other top 10 that we have, and the other is the white-black legendary rare.
Ariel, something like that, I think.
I believe that's the one. It's the 4-mana 4/4 with Vigilance, which, by the way, is an absolute house in Limited. It just takes over a game. Your deck only has knights in it, and I could see that working very well with this, especially the fact that you just keep playing cards that are knights.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Do you think there's any chance that Knights is good enough for Standard, Zach, or is this going to be kind of a more casual, fun type of tribe than a competitive tribe?
I could see a Knight deck working out, mostly because of the 2-mana Knights, the white one and the black one that have hexproof from a color. I think those are good enough simply because they have First Strike. Both white and black have access to excellent removal.
Let's move on our list, because we got another Knight card that we'll be talking about in a minute, so we'll revisit Knights in the future. But next, we're heading to the world of Goblins, with Goblin Chainwhirler, the new 3-mana triple red Goblin. So, what do you think of this one, Zach? Is this a Goblin card, or is this just a really good red card?
I don't think it's necessarily a Goblin card. I think it's just a really good red card. The 3-mana that are all red for a 3/3 is a bit hard to cast, especially since a lot of the monocolored decks have been enjoying playing other lands such as Scavenger Grounds or Field of Ruin. That comes with a drawback on deck building. But having your deck be able to cast this card on curve or even later is incredibly important, because at the moment, Standard has quite a lot of creatures that only have 1 toughness, including, Bomat Courier, Glint Sleeve, Siphoner, a lot of the white aggro creatures. Many of the cards in the blue-red Godpharaoh gift deck, pretty much all of them have exactly 1 toughness.
So this is like a 3-mana one-sided Wrath.
Right. It's also pretty good at beating up on a few of the planeswalkers that want to tick down. So, Chandra Torch of Defiance, for example, goes from 4 loyalty to 1, and this deals damage to planeswalkers.
Yeah, I think the new Teferi, I think, is the same. I think it goes from 4 to 1 as well. So you can just snipe a planeswalker. Do you think this is in consideration for the mono red deck? Are you expecting this to just slot in there, or is the fact that they have the Scavenger Grounds, maybe Sunscorched Desert, does that make them change their mana base to play this card, or do they not play this card? Where does this fit with the red deck?
I'm not the best red player. However, I do think that it's enough to shift the mana base to more pure red, because sure, if you sacrifice the Sunscorched Deserts, which just deal 1 to a player, in order to play this Goblin, which also happens to deal 1 to a player, that will give you such an edge in the mirror, just being able to destroy opposing Earthshaker Kenras or Bomat Couriers, or even make interesting attacks and blocks where you can finish something off. I think it's a good, worthwhile creature.
Let's move on to some of our mythics. I think we have 4 mythics to talk about to round out our list. And we have another night card, History of Benalia, the first saga I think we've talked about. So, Zach, what are you doing with History of Benalia?
This is one of those cards that I could see in almost any type of strategy just because of how versatile it is. Notably, it's great in an aggro deck where you curve out a 1-drop into a 2-drop into this 3-mana 2/2 creature that creates another 2/2 creature. The final chapter buffs knights. So if you build your deck with a whole bunch of knights, you have a pretty impressive, aggressive knight deck. What's important to note about this saga is I don't think any sagas actually are legendary. So you can just play multiples in a row, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this card has been a bit of a sleeper because it doesn't necessarily jump off the cardboard, I guess. It's like, oh, you make a 2/2, you make a 2/2, you pump some stuff. But I think people are starting to catch on because making 2/2s just by itself for 3 mana is not that bad. Like, that's a pretty reasonable deal, and that's discounting any of the tribal synergies, the fact that you're pumping those creatures into 4/3s, and they have vigilance. So even as just an army in a can all by itself, it seems like a really solid addition. And if you are thinking of playing Night Tribal, I feel like this has to be one of the best payoffs. If you just curve out your knights, play one of the 2-drop protection or hexproof from color knights into a 4-drop knight, the timing lines up, so you're pumping like 4 different knight creatures +2/+1 on turn 5. That's going to close out a lot of games. So I think if Knights Tribal is going to work, this is probably going to be a big reason for it.
Absolutely. I could also see this at some point down the line being a card that some of the control decks play, which might seem a bit odd. But imagine if you're in the control mirror and you have a 3-mana, essentially 4/4, just 2 separate creatures that you can use to attack with while you hold up counterspells. Because when you cast it on turn 3, you get to hold up mana for turn 4, turn 5, and so on. It's also curious with cards that can flicker, blink the card in and out, such as Oath of Teferi, where you can recycle it after it's made 2 nights. You just flicker it so you can get 2 more. Or even the new Into the Royal, which I think is Blink of an Eye. I forget the name of that one. Because that's a card that you could realistically expect to see in any sort of control deck that has blue in it. And to sideboard in these history sagas as a way to get aggressive against control strategies is a pretty valid aggressive plan.
Well, let's move on to our next mythic. We're sticking with the white ones, and Baneslayer Angel is back, apparently. Lyra Dawnbringer. What are you doing with this one, Zach?
This card looks beautiful, and it plays beautifully. I love my 5-mana, 5/5 lifelink creatures. I think what I like most about this card is the fact that it's so large. So having 5 toughness means that it's resistant to Glorybringer. Who needs protection from dragons when you just don't die to the one that's attacking you, and you can first strike it back and kill it off. It can also stop the Rekindling Phoenix, or it lives through Chandra. Having 5 toughness is a very big deal. I think this will make a clean finisher for any sort of control deck that wants to play white. So whether that's blue-white or black-white or red-white control,
So this is obviously a legend, and it's kind of expensive. So let's say you're building that white X control deck. How many copies do you think you're playing of Lyra? Like, do you have any sense? Is it a 4 of, a 3 of, a 2 of, just a 1 of on the top end?
You could easily see 3 copies. If the card turns out to be just that good, 4 copies is totally fine because when you say you have a hand that has 2 of them, when you play the first one, it's likely that it might go away. Maybe that's because Vraska's Contempt finally has something to target and it gets rid of your angel. Just having multiple of these, I think, is okay.
Let's move on to our final 2 cards. We have 2 planeswalkers to round out our list tonight. First off, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the new 5 mana blue-white planeswalker. So take it away, Zach. What do you think of this one?
Given that I love control decks, I really like this Planeswalker because it, in a way, protects itself by untapping 2 of your lands, which lets you leave up a 2 mana removal spell, such as 2 of the other ones we already saw in the set, like Seal Away or Vicious Offering, or even something simple like Lightning Strike or Fatal Push. It immediately presents a threat as you play it. It says, I'm just going to keep drawing cards, and I'm always going to have mana up, especially the turn after you play. If you just get to untap with it, then you're just drawing cards like most of the Jace Planeswalkers did. I was extra excited when I saw that the second ability was very good. Being able to put any permanent that's causing an issue. It does say non-land, but virtually you're able to put the, say, permanents that have been cast out or that have been Ixalan binding, or even something that's a nuisance, such as Hazoret or the Scarab God. You can hide it back into the deck, which gives you plenty of time to just continue drawing cards with Teferi. Or if you really want, you can use Field of Ruin to force the card to get shuffled away, which I think is a really cool interaction.
Oh, that's a really cool idea. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, there is a lot of value there. It's almost reminiscent of Chandra in some sense, where you have a +1 that generates the card advantage, and then the -3 that's the removal spell. And then if you get to the ultimate, it doesn't win the game immediately, but it is going to win the game. Like, as you're drawing cards and exiling things, it's almost like Venser Planeswalkers Ultimate. I think the fact that you untap lands is super huge. That makes it really nice to be able to tap out, and then you kind of get this weird, if you're playing a control deck, you got instants, you got counter spells, you got removal spells. Like you said, the following turn, you can feel a little bit safer to actually progress your board and cast some stuff, knowing that you can untap those lands and still have mana up to interact on your opponent's turn. We've definitely played in past standards 5 mana Jace, which is basically played just because it was the +1 was draw a card. And this is very similar, except it does way, way more and it is way, way more powerful. So if 5 mana Jace could be played in standard control decks, it's hard to see that Teferi isn't going to be good enough.
It may also see play outside of a control deck. Since we have Gift of Paradise, the 3 mana green aura that essentially ramps you from 3 to 5. That ramps you from 3 mana so you can cast this 5 mana Planeswalker. And since Teferi says you can untap any 2 lands, you can untap the one that you enchanted, and you have even more mana up, which I think is pretty neat.
Oh, that is definitely sweet. You can also do some sweet tricks with, if you are playing control, with like Search for Iskanta, because all of those enchantments are flipping into lands, so you can like use it main phase to dig for a spell and then untap it with Teferi and use it on your opponent's turn, so you're like doubling up your Iskanta activations, which is a nice little trick. So definitely some cool things you can do with the untapping of lands.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the final card on our list, and Karn is back. Karn, Scion of Urza. So I was pretty surprised when I saw Karn was just 4 mana. It's definitely not what I was expecting when we knew that Karn was returning in Dominaria, but the 4 mana Karn seems pretty powerful to me. What do you think, Zach?
I absolutely love it, just because I love artifacts and colorless cards a lot, and this just kind of, it's all of that in one, and it also just gets you a lot of cards. When I first saw it, it reminded me a lot of Hazoret the Schemer, which is a card that I'm fond of in Standard, a 4 mana Planeswalker that starts at 5 loyalty and goes up to 6. It has so much loyalty. Getting rid of the thing can be a pain. And the fact that this Karn, even if you get rid of the first one after it's upticked once or twice, That means they can still play a second one later on down the line and get whatever card they were just hiding in exile. It's almost like the Snapcaster grab bag, if you will. The Karn's just filling it up, and then whenever you want, you can get the best card out of it and use it.
Yeah, and it's pretty sweet that it exiles the cards with the counter on them, and even if your Karn dies, your second, those counters stay there, so you can get it with a future copy of Karn in the late game if you want to. What do you think about the negative two? I think one of the weird things about this card is you see the create this artifact creature that cares about other artifacts, and you think, okay, I gotta play this like Tezzeret in a artifact based deck to make this work, but is that necessarily true? Like, do you have to have a bunch of artifacts to make those tokens good, or can you just play this to plus it, minus it, plus it, and be drawing an extra card every turn?
I don't think it's required that you need to play with artifacts at all, or even use that last ability for a lot of people, especially if they plan to use this card, say, in their mid-range deck to have a better late game, where this might be a sideboard card, say, and they'll bring it in for game 2, and the card's just going to, Karn will constantly give you more and more cards to work with, and that's good enough. I think that will work for a lot of decks. I do think there is room to build a deck that is based around artifacts, where the first thing you want to do with Karn is tick down -2. And I'm definitely going to be experimenting with those type of decks, but you have 3 turns to set up for it, where you play an artifact, you play a second one, you play a third one, and then when you cast Karn for the very first time in the game, you create a 4/4 because you already have other artifacts that support. And in a way, that creates a 4/4 that defends Karn, which means next turn, if they haven't dealt with it, then you get to create another 4/4, except both of your 4/4s are now 5/5s.
Yeah, we have a decent amount of strong artifacts in the format. All the vehicles from Kaladesh, Treasure Map is pretty sweet with this, putting 3 artifacts on the battlefield, so there are a ton of good artifact synergies. Is this something that you could play alongside Tezzeret, Zach? I know you're like a huge Tezzeret fan. Could you imagine them coexisting in the same deck, or are you just going to overload that 4-drop slot too much to try to play both of them?
I'm pretty sure the first deck I'm going to toy with will have 4 Karns, 4 Tezzerets, and some number of Heart of Kirans. So I can definitely see them going alongside each other.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'll be excited to see how that one turns out, because I've always liked Tezzeret decks as well, so it'll be cool to see that possibly working in Standard. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our top 10 list. So any other thoughts on Dominaria, anything on the way out the door today, Zach?
I think it's going to bring a lot to the table for Standard. I'm really looking forward to how it shifts some decks around. I personally am excited to toy with more of the artifacts, because each time they add more artifacts to Standard, Tezzeret the Schemer gets better, and I am a big fan of that card. So I see a lot of potential here, and I'm looking forward to playing with it.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it too. I think one other question. So, what do you think about this set's impact in the immediate future? We have a very powerful standard. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording. We have a very powerful standard. Kaladesh block has kind of dominated Standard for a long time now. Do you think we'll see a big impact right away, or will the big impact come this fall once we have the rotation of Kaladesh and Amonkhet and those blocks?
It's likely it may take a while. It may take until rotation for Dominaria to really settle in, simply because of how big of an impact that Kaladesh has had. Kaladesh block has had many different effects upon the Standard format, let's say. And you also have the Hour of Devastation gods, or Amonkhet gods. Hazard and Scarab god have been very big players. And when all of that leaves at the same time, then your backbone for what Standard looks like is going to be Ixalan and Dominaria. And I think Dominaria feels a little bit stronger in regards to these cards are very powerful, and they offer potential for a strong deck to be built around them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a pretty good chance that after rotation this fall, Dominaria is kind of the set, kind of like Kaladesh has been for so long, but that's just forming the backbone of Standard. And I think that's really exciting because the feedback has been great. You really like this set, I really like this set, and we're recording this on pre-release weekend, and I've heard almost just universal praise from people on social media, people at pre-releases. People just love Dominaria, so well done, Wizards, and well done, Zach. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's always awesome to talk about some of the new Standard cards.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy talking about Magic cards and what cool things there are left undiscovered that can be brought about by putting these cards into decks and doing really weird stuff.
And thank you to everyone for watching. So make sure to let us know what cards you are most excited for Dominaria, for Standard. Leave us your list in the comments. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? Give us that feedback. Let us know what you think. It's a super exciting set. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks to Zach for hanging out, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.